Hello everyone, this is the first video of the Farmers Market P5X YouTube channel, and today we're going to be talking about Revelations cards, how they work, and why they're the most important part of a character build. The first thing we're going to do is identify all of the card types, and I'm not going to go into every single mixture of build you can have on a character, just because I feel like that's a little much, and you can kind of figure that out on your own from reading the descriptions. But the main thing is going into each of these, why they're significant, how they work, and all that. So the first one is going to be Sun, and Sun always is going to have HP on it no matter what. It's just your HP card. Then you have Moon, you have Star, and Star is where you're going to see a lot of builds want you to have your crit rate card or your crit molt card. And then Planet or Sky. Game calls it Sky, but it has a little picture of Saturn on it, so I call it Planet. But for this video, I'll try to stick to calling it Sky because the game seems to call the card Sky. So the last card is your space card. So your space card kind of dictates what your standard cards, what effect they're going to have. So you can see a preview of what different builds do, and that's what I was talking about, kind of avoiding going through all of these. And that could be a separate video if that's something people, really want to see. But yeah, for now, that's just kind of the overview of how these cards work, what they're called. Generally, your main flex in a build is going to be on the Moon card and on the Sky card, because Sun is always going to be HP, and Star is always going to be crit molt or crit rate on a DPS typically. But there is some situations where that's not what you put on there. So, what is the most important part of building a character, right? Like, what is the point of these? What do they do? So the most important part of building a character on a card, specifically with DPS, is the main stat up here. And generally, obviously, you want these gold cards. The gold cards are the most valuable stat-wise. However, if the gold card doesn't have a desirable effect on a character, then it may not even be worth it to use it. So, for example, on Makoto here, if we had a Moon, and this was Moon Defense with a substat of attack, but we had a purple, which I don't. Oh, yeah. Say we had a purple. Say this purple was attack, and it had attack 25, or whatever attack maxes out on purples. We would actually end up using this card over a gold defense, because defense isn't going to do anything for a DPS. So it's not always about the highest level card you have, right? Sometimes you do have to use a purple just because it can be hard to high roll the cards you want, which is understandable. It's more about knowing how to use the best cards you have. So the next thing I want to do is show you guys a bad build on a DPS and the effects it has in battle, and how much of a difference it can make if you have your cards optimized. So this is the build we're going to be using. They do not go on Makoto. The defense cards, HP cards, things like that. Even if we leveled them, it would level the main stat and level the substats not so much. I'll go into how substats scale and things like that in a bit, but our main goal here first is to show you damage numbers on bad builds on DPSs and damage numbers on good builds for DPSs. So we're going to be using Futsunushi as an example from Nuclear Winter 25. And we're just going to do one mask turn from Makoto. You'll notice the speed's a little jacked up here, so Makoto's going to go second. That's fine. I'm going to make it fair when we do the good build as well. So Cord's not going to get to go, but I am going to use her highlight, and she's A1, so she'll be good. Alright, so Cord highlight into mask into skill 3, which is the big damage move from Makoto. And about 70,000. So that's going to be our score to beat on our good build. So let's check that out. Quick little transition here. I'm in almost the exact same scenario with my preferred build. and we scored 151k, which is significantly more. So now we're going to go into what the reasoning is for that. Why did she get so much higher, over 2x more? So now we're back working with the preferred queen build, and we're just going to point out some stats that significantly impact damage. Our biggest change is just swapping over to attack cards and also using a crit rate card. These are your most significant build upgrades. However, substats are very important, and I'm going to break some of those down. Pierce rate, for example, is not something you really hear talked about a lot in this game. I don't know if the game explains it either, but pierce rate ignores defense when dealing damage. It's only a substat, so it can't appear as a main stat, and it is a great one to roll. It's very good. You also want to find room in most DPS builds for crit rate and crit molt. You'll notice that on star, that's the only place where crit rate and crit molt can be a main stat. So what your star card is will determine which stat you'll be looking to work on in substat form. So for example, my Mikoto, she has truth star crit rate. So now that we have 18% crit rate, that means we'll be looking for crit molt. So anywhere else in this build, I would want to look for more crit molt. You can see I'm kind of lacking, but it's okay. Point is, if I had a perfect build, yeah, I would go for a card like this that has more crit molt on it. Another thing to mention is planet cards. The thing about it is, though, you can't really grind for space cards. I'm sorry, I said planet, I meant space cards. The thing is, you can't really grind for them, and you really also don't want to be using the selectors willy-nilly, because the space card selectors are some of the rarest items in the game, and their effect can be so important that I won't say they'll make a character unusable, but they're very important effects. So definitely don't just roll for these. Try to get them in the shop when they appear, the random selectors, and you know, if you run into more than one of them, then that's great, and you can give it a shot as far as re-rolling for something better if you get a bad stat on one of these. But this is going to be your last line as far as upgrades go. You're mainly going to be focused on optimizing these four right here. So I feel like I've gone over a decent amount of difference on why these cards are important, how they need to be tuned, etc. So we're going to move on to something else. Alright, so the next thing I want to go over is substats on cards. So for DPS, it's typically pretty straightforward. It's hard to say that some things on substats are just bad all around. If there is one that is, it is SP recovery. There is no character in Global right now that really needs SP recovery. Nightmare Gateway and SOS are tailored in a fashion where you generally will never run out of SP. So these cards are just filler, and in my opinion, something bad to make you miss a good stat on, pretty much. Ailment accuracy is also another one you want to try to avoid, just because, you know, there's only one character that uses it as part of their kit right now, and that's Vino. And attack molt. Attack molt is a really tricky stat. Typically, you almost always want attack over attack molt, but you know, it's a very strange stat. It's also called damage boost in China, and I'll be honest, there's not a whole lot about it online. It's supposed to be a damage amplifier, but my issue with attack molt is this game's ceiling on regular attack is not really clear on where that ceiling is, and it's not as clear as crit rate plus crit molt, for example. Crit rate, once you hit 100%, that's going to be as much crit as you can get. So then you start stacking crit molt, right? And with attack and attack molt, it doesn't work that way, because, you know, a character like Mikoto doesn't have an attack ceiling. So I've done a little bit of testing, and generally attack has been better than attack molt for me, but it may be worth looking into on sweepers versus assassins, but I'm not going to say that that's 100% etched in stone. The other thing is your planet cards. So the stats that are on those and on regular cards, this fourth stat is generally obscured. If we look at a card like this, your fourth stat will be obscured And if you level it to 5, like this, you get to see what that fourth stat is. Okay? So the thing about that, why that's relevant, is because if you hit a card with one of the items that reset the Revelations card, it will get rid of this fourth stat and give you a new one. And I made a recording for you guys to check that out that I will play now. So this is a card I chose to reset because the fourth stat isn't great on it, and I wanted to show you guys this. So you can see this hindrance card has SP recovery on it for its fourth stat. And what we're going to do here is reset it so it turns into that piece on the left there. And I'm going to show you what you can do is use a retrograde card on a card like this. And when you level it back up to 5 to show the obscured stat, it will roll a new one instead of the one it had previously. So it's really good for cards that have 3 great stats and a 4th bad one. So definitely save your retro cards for that. Alright, back on the topic of bad substats, so stats that are undesirable on DPS characters, let's talk about speed. SP recovery and ailment accuracy, like I said before, are kind of useless. Speed is actually a overall negative stat on a DPS. They can make your DPS character nearly unusable at worst and difficult to speed tune with support characters at best. You always want your main DPS to go last in battle, so the lower you make their speed, the more versatility they have with your team and with teams you may need to synergize in the future. It's tough to get a perfect build, so don't worry if you have an SP recovery or ailment accuracy card here or there in your build, but speed is pretty crucially important to have as low as you can have it. Moving on, let's talk about some positive Revelations cards effects, because I feel like I've been fairly negative about a lot of the stats, so ones you should be actually looking out for. As I mentioned earlier, Pierce Rate is very, very good. However, it's also fairly rare. So the general great stats you want to look for on cards like these with DPS characters are attack, attack percent, crit rate and crit mult, and attack mult. Damage isn't really doing anything for you, but it's also not hurting you. Same with HP. It's not gonna hurt or help. Crit rate and crit mult I won't go over again, but I will explain the difference between attack percent and flat attack. They both increase attack, but attack percent is always the better stat to roll. It's always going to end up giving you more, especially with this one where I kind of low rolled the attack. You could definitely get higher than that sometimes. So when you get a card, its starting value is random, and then when you level the card, its boosted value, those little yellow arrows there, are also random on what gets buffed and how much it gets buffed, which is based on the starting value, if that makes sense. So flat attack and percent attack, you definitely want percent attack over flat attack, but if you get both of them, then that's even better because you have the opportunity to get them both boosted. So it is the highest amount of attack you can have on one card. So that's awesome. And another thing to mention is this is a pretty high roll card. It took me a very long time to roll this one. So definitely don't try to have all your cards like this. You'll go broke on stamina pretty quickly. But it is nice to get to this point eventually. This is where you would want to get down the road. That's generally the overview for building DPS characters in P5X. The issue with getting more specific is that certain characters have different things their attacks scale off of. For example, Kiyoshi, he scales off of HP, so there our build would be completely different. It's a lot easier to just stick to DPS characters since that's where it's most important to have them built properly. Yusuke is a DPS that is pretty uncommon in how you build him. He scales off of defense. So generally though, that's one of the weirder ones. Most of them are going to want this setup where they use attack cards and they use crit mult or crit rate cards. So if there's a character build you're interested in specific, feel free to leave a comment and I can offer some suggestions. As far as great resources to reference for Revelations cards, Lufel.net's a good place generally to check what character skills are worth leveling, what Revelations card sets characters typically use, things like that. Support characters have different sets they swap between, which is one reason we didn't go into that in this video, but DPS characters remain fairly consistent. This channel is being made specifically for our guild, the Farmers Market. We also have a Discord that I'll leave in the description. If you're not interested in Nightmare Gateway and competitions and things like that, then feel free to join, even if that's the case, because we have a pretty friendly community. This is my first video on this game, so if you're newer or confused on some aspects of this game, since it's still fairly new here in the States and globally, please leave a comment as a suggestion for a future video, and thank you for watching.